And welcome back to another episode of the Double Doing Podcast. My name is Brendan Deek. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. We would greatly appreciate it. You can also rate the podcast and review the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. It would also be greatly appreciated. My co-host, Mr. Eric Warrensy, is with us, but today we have a very special guest. Super excited for today's episode. We have Crissy Froyd of the Draft Network and NBC Sports with us. Crissy, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I know this is definitely a very busy time of year for you. So why don't you just kind of explain like your job quickly off the top here? Like what do you specialize in? What do you kind of do for NBC and Draft Network?
Yeah, so at NBC Sports Edge, I'm mostly a columnist, and pretty much everywhere that I work, everything's basically quarterback centric outside of a few things every once in a while. So I do that for NBC, and then the Draft Network is purely about 98% quarterback. I interview basically every quarterback in the country, watch tape on all those guys. And then for Sports Illustrated, I cover Mississippi State. So it's a pretty busy thing to do, but it keeps things entertaining for sure.
Okay, so let's start out with this because you did a lot of interviews for last year's draft class. Why don't you kind of tell us about your opinion on how these quarterbacks have succeeded, or if they kind of match what you thought they would be in the NFL, like Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, all the guys that you kind of talked to last year?
Yeah, I think it's gone about how I would expect, maybe not everyone else, because in the modern era, there's kind of become this thing that people think that a quarterback should be able to come in and fix a franchise. Just because he was really good in college means that he can instantly go and make an NFL team a world beater all of a sudden. That's just not how it works. Even the quarterbacks that do well their first year, I thought that before Joe Burrow got injured, that he had a really good first year. But even the ones that do well their first year, I still stand beside the notion that if they had to sit for at least a year, they would be that much better. That's the way that it used to be. That's the way that I think it should be. I think that out of the entire class, who's done the best is Mac Jones. And I think that it worked out well for him. I thought that Mac Jones is better than where he fell to in the draft. I think he's very developed pure pocket passer, but he landed in a favorable situation with a team that knows how to utilize a pocket passer. And so I feel like that's why he's been the most successful. I'd say Davis Mills was the second most successful. Kind of a rocky start there, as it would be for any rookie getting pushed into a situation like that. But I think he's done a really good job. And I think that Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence will continue to take a step moving forward into year two. I think that Zach just needed to sit a little bit longer. Obviously not an advantageous situation with what's going on in New York as far as supporting cast goes entirely. And I could say the same about Jacksonville.
All right, so let's get an early prediction on this 2022 class. What do you think this crop of quarterbacks are going to be remembered for?
I think that over time, I'd say looking back at it in 3 to 5 years, something like that we'll see there's a lot more reliable backup, high-end backup potential in this class than a lot of people have given it credit for, because I've seen a lot of people pretty much just writing off the class, which I don't see. And I think that at least 2 guys out of it are going to hit. I think if Malik Willis hits his ceiling, he becomes one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL within 2 to 3 years. I think that Carson Strong, depending on where he lands and how the setup is there, he's on the same trajectory as Mac Jones. Desmond Ritter has a really good set of foundational traits. Finding consistency with accuracy is something that I'm going to be looking at, but he told me that he's been putting in a lot of work as far as his lower body mechanics go this offseason. So I think there's a lot of intrigue in this class that people aren't paying attention to. I think there's a lot of question marks about basically every single quarterback in this class, which is kind of what's throwing that narrative a little bit. But I don't think that it's one to be written off. I do see talent within it.
Right. I can hear that. She might be a Dwight listener right there. I've been banging that drum all week, man. I think this quarterback class is awesome. I think there's a lot of untapped talent here.
Yeah. Do you think that the main reason for maybe not a lot of buzz, a lot of hype about this class is that we don't have like a prospect from Alabama or Ohio State or any of the big schools? It's kind of the Pittsburghs, the Liberty. Like, do you think that's the main reason, or is it just strictly talent based?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the helmet sticker, the whole level of competition narrative has a lot to do with it. But yeah, I think that it's kind of become something as far as there's no real, there's never been a consensus QB1. There is no Trevor Lawrence, even though I put Zach Wilson over Trevor Lawrence last year. There is no Joe Burrow. I think that Kenny Pickett shows flashes of Joe Burrow, but I think there's a little bit of a gap there with some potential.
Okay, so you had a name about a minute ago that you mentioned, Carson Strong. That's a guy that I had a ton of fun watching. The Nevada offense in general was just a blast to watch. I thought it was probably top 3 most exciting offenses that I got to study over the last few weeks. Why don't you tell me a little bit about kind of the untalked about guy who's probably 6? I'm guessing the 6th ranked quarterback on many boards, maybe a little higher over Sam Howell, but he hasn't been talked about a lot from the national media. So why don't you just kind of explain a little bit about him and his kind of upbringing so far to where he is now?
Yeah, that's been really interesting to watch because, I mean, you go at the beginning of the season or ahead of the season, there's some people that have Carson Strong as high as number 1 overall. And I'm not just talking quarterbacks, I'm talking the entire board. And when I noticed him start to slip was after this rumor came out that he had a degenerative knee, which is not true. He's been cleared by a Los Angeles Rams doctor. I've released that. Jim Nagy has released that. I've been in touch with several people in Carson Strong's camp since sometime, I want to say, in like early 2021. So it's a situation that I've been very much in the loop with. And I also think that outside of that, you have the smaller school narrative, and then you have the pure pocket passer narrative, and then you have the air raid narrative. He has every possible stigma that could possibly surround a quarterback. I think that he has around him, but I don't see it that way. I've studied the air raid offense for 2 years. I looked into some other offenses. There's no other offense that develops a pure passer better than the air raid. And there's also this misconception that, the air raid's too simple. It's a one-read offense. Well, no, that the quarterback doesn't just get a free pass. And if you go back through the air raid and the history of it, quarterbacks that have played in it, you will see some low numbers from some quarterbacks. It's because, yes, you do still have to be able to play quarterback to post high numbers. People think that it's like this instant ticket to, this guy's going to have sky high stats just because he plays in the air raid offense. No, it takes a tremendous amount of accuracy because you're throwing the ball almost every single play. So I think that he's been set up with that and then responsibilities at the line of scrimmage and essentially becoming a coach on the field toward the last 2 years of his career. I don't see a guy that has a better level of mental processing. And then the deep ball down the sideline, to me, is the hardest throw a quarterback can make. And he was making that sometimes three times a game. Never missed a beat, never missed a week on that. So I think that it kind of, people look at the modern era of the NFL and they go, a guy has to be super athletic. Well, no, I think that it's starting to trend more toward a quarterback that can function as a pure pocket passer, but can also move a little bit, move up the pocket, stuff like that. And Carson can do that. And I feel like there's this narrative that he's a statue. So there's just a lot of unfair things working against him. But I think looking back at it, as long as he lands in the right place, people are going to realize how wrong they were.
So if you're the Detroit Lions, you're sitting at number 2. Would you think it would be crazy for them to take a quarterback at number 2? Or do you think they should just wait until even pick 32? So they still get that 5th-year option, but is it just at 2? Are any of these quarterbacks worth taking?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions to be answered about that still, whether or not they will be. I think that I could see them taking Malik Willis. I think Malik Willis is going to definitely be taken within the top, I'd say, 8 picks of the draft. He's going to be the 1st or 2nd quarterback off the board. There's no question about that. So I think I could see them going for a quarterback, and I do think that it's going to be Malik Willis. And then whichever team, though, takes a quarterback first, you're going to be betting on, do you want the ceiling or do you want the floor? Kenny Pickett is probably going to at least be a high-end, very reliable backup with starting potential. And then Malik Willis, if he hits his ceiling, is, like I said, going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So I think that it would be wise of them to take a quarterback early, as far as like if you want the absolute best potential out of this class, the way that I see the predictive rankings going, because I'm not sure that toward the end of the 1st round, you've got some guys that have a little bit more question marks surrounding them.
Okay, Chris, I want you to put your GM hat on for a bit here. You just brought Malik Willis, could go 2nd overall or could be the highest quarterback drafted. Would you take Malik Willis as the highest quarterback drafted? Who would you take at the top of this quarterback class?
Well, I think that it's become pretty evident over time that my QB1 is Carson Strong, and that if I were adding to the team and I had a decent enough offensive line where I thought that I could fix that some more, or maybe I could sit this guy for 2 years, I would absolutely take Carson Strong. I mean, I see why there's buzz about Malik Willis, but I have personally never been high on Malik Willis. That's why he's my QB4. So a lot of red flags there. He had like a 40% completion percentage against, I want to say it was the University of Louisiana Lafayette, had 3 games with 3 interceptions each against very subpar secondaries. And anytime he faced any real competition, which I think was only once or twice, things just went really south for him. And I have questions about how does that mobility translate to the NFL? Can he run around like that at the NFL? Is it actually going to work that way? And then this development as a passer that we've seen this offseason, if that's for real and he stays consistent with that, that's great. He's a true dual threat quarterback at that point. But there's also the question of that's what a combined 10-ish days of showcases and then versus a year of tape with a lot of really bad red flags as a passer.
I want to talk about Desmond Ritter for a second here. Where do you have him on your quarterback board, and how high is his ceiling? Could you see him potentially one day being like a top 10 quarterback in the league, a top 20? Where do you think he slots in?
I have him as QB6 right now, and a lot of that came down to just I thought that his time at Cincinnati overall was it just appeared to be lackluster. Granted that the Cincinnati offense didn't utilize him in a way that really shows off a quarterback's talent. I kind of feel the same way about Brock Purdy at Iowa State. In a certain sense, like I said, I think that he has the best set of foundational traits. It's just how much is he going to continue to develop and how much he's going to continue to build off of those, because one of the biggest red flags of the quarterback is inconsistency with accuracy. And that was something that I saw from him a few times, and also some questionable decision-making from time to time, including at the Senior Bowl. So I think, like I said, he's been training with Jordan Palmer. He's been doing a lot of work on lower body mechanics, which quarterbacking starts from the ground up. So that's how you fix your accuracy. And I think that he showed some good things at the combine. But I would like to see Desmond Ritter prove some of us wrong and maybe land with more of a freewheeling offense that utilizes more of a mobile quarterback, because I think that he has this sense of athleticism that has not been shown because Cincinnati would not allow him to show it. And I think that maybe he could be something of a Marcus Mariota.
Breaking my heart here. I had Desmond Ritter as my QB1. So we're not seeing eye to eye on that one. But I want to talk about the name you just mentioned, Brock Purdy, because I'm an Eagles guy, and I do think if the Eagles do take a quarterback in the later rounds, Brock Purdy is a name to watch out for. Nick Sirianni has that Iowa State connection. So you did talk to Brock Purdy during this process. What'd you learn about him?
Well, he's definitely a very humble guy that does not make excuses for himself. One of the conversations that we had was about the meetings he's had with teams and about how they would go over some of the plays that he had that were bad. And he'd pretty much say, yeah, I made the wrong decision on that play. And I think that was one of Brock's biggest issues, at least early on, was decision-making. And not all of it was horrible, but you would have, I've noticed several plays where, I mean, I don't have the Iowa State playbook in my hand, but there were several plays where it looked like he was missing his best option and throwing the second best option, which sometimes that's not really going to affect a lot. But if you lose a game by a touchdown and you had a couple plays where a guy was home free, that's something that you want to look at. But I do think that Brock Purdy has some of the best lower body mechanics in this class, which is why he had like a 72% completion percentage this past season. I think that the way that they tailored the offense to Breece Hall kind of limited him. That's why the narrative formed, I think, that he can't throw the deep ball, which he absolutely can. I mean, he had that 68-yarder in that one game that I've seen on tape. There's more deep ball stuff in the tape. He showed that at Pro Day, showed that at the Combine. So I think as far as the decision-making went, there are some questions there. He needs to establish a higher rate of consistency, I think, throughout a season. But I think there's so much more to build upon there than a lot of people realize.
Another quarterback we haven't brought up yet, Kenny Pickett. Where do you have him on your board?
I have him
quickly. You spoke with him back in October, correct?
Yeah, I've spoken with literally every single one of these quarterbacks except for Corral. Every single one of them.
Cool.
Okay, so tell me what you think of Kenny Pickett. Where do you have him sliding in?
Yeah, I think he's going to be the first or second quarterback off the board. I just have a gut feeling that Malik Willis is going to go first. So I would say QB2. I know some people are thinking that Matt Corral might be able to jump Kenny Pickett, that Kenny Pickett might be QB3. I thought that Kenny Pickett this offseason in the showcases didn't do anything to hurt himself, didn't do anything to help himself. His quarterback trainer calls him Johnny Consistent, and I really can't think of a better way to describe a player like this. So I think that he's above average in every single aspect of quarterbacking. He kind of lacks an it factor to me, although he put up big numbers for a reason. I think that was just a product of his pure progression. But with quarterbacks like him and other quarterbacks in this class, we kind of look at all the tape before and it's lackluster, and then suddenly they take this big jump. So then you're kind of faced with the question of, is this a fluke or is this for real? But I think that there's a very low risk factor with Kenny Pickett. He has the highest floor in this class. And then if he can build upon some of those flashes of Joe Burrow that I saw when I watched him this season, if he can build upon that, then he's going to be, I think his ceiling will be a lot higher than people might have thought before.
How Sorry, do you think the hand size is an issue? Do you think there'll be teams that have them completely off their board just because of the hand size?
Well, I think with every team, like just across the entire NFL, there will be certain people that are wary of that. And I think whenever we saw him play with one glove at the Senior Bowl, and then he had some issues with inclement weather and it seemed to affect him. But then at the same time, you kind of look at some of the other games he's played in adverse conditions and did great in. So, I mean, I think that it can affect ball security. That's where your main concern comes in with that. But I wouldn't view it as something that would just be an absolute deal breaker.
Okay, there are 5 quarterbacks, and you mentioned Carson Strong, so we'll make 6 quarterbacks kind of get all the love here. Ritter, Willis, Corral, Howell, Pickett, and Strong. Is there a guy that you think isn't getting enough love in the national media heading into Thursday?
Well, I think it has to be Carson Strong just because of the way that people were talking about him, and then suddenly the rumor comes out and then no one's talking about him. I don't really think that Carson Strong has done anything to really lower his draft stock. I thought that he was one of the most consistent quarterbacks all season. If you go back and I stayed up late until like 11 o'clock at night to go watch those super late Nevada games.
Yeah.
And he hardly ever skipped a beat. I mean, there's no game that stands out to me as though that's a god awful game by Carson Strong. I think it's just the fact that he, like I said, has about 5 separate stigmas working against him. And he's not the flashy athlete dual threat guy that everyone wants. Outside of other guys have at least some element of that to them.
Outside of Carson Strong, is there another guy? What about Bailey Zapp? It's Zapp, right, from Western Kentucky. What do you think?
It's actually pronounced Zappy, which I was mispronouncing it for a solid half of a year.
That's one of the cooler names.
From a personal standpoint, is the best quarterback I have ever worked with.
Cool.
Really easy to get along with, really good personality, very, very respectful. I think that with him, it's such a curious case because he broke the FBS record for single season passing yards and touchdowns. And I think it's important to realize too that yes, he did run in the air raid offense, but he came from Houston Baptist, which ran a very pure form of the air raid offense, and spent his last season at WKU, which runs the air raid offense, but the quarterback has to have a much more complex understanding of protections. They have a whole different run game element that goes with it. So I think that should be factored in before we pass off these stats as, oh, well, he just played in the air raid. I think that he has a really good ability to read defenses. I mean, the ball comes out of his hand lightning quick. You can tell that he knows it's going to happen on every play. The only thing about him that I would say is a little bit bothersome is in some parts of the tape and then some parts of the showcases that he was participating in, some of the shorter and intermediate stuff he seems to have a little bit of a hard time with. But I watched him every day at the Senior Bowl, and I noticed him progressively getting better at that. So I think that's something that might be a little bit of a concern just because he's so great at the deep ball and you can launch it on basically every play with him and be successful. But I think that's something to clean up, and I think it's something he can get better at. And I think that if we look back at this class, that he could potentially end up being overall the most underrated. It's the lower level competition narrative that's kind of surrounding him. And so it's going to be interesting just to watch how he makes that transition and if he can keep it up at the next level.
So when do you start looking into next year's crop of quarterbacks? Have you already started, or is it just 365 days a year quarterbacks for you?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I've interviewed somewhere between 10 and 15 quarterbacks from next year. Cool. Tyler Van Dyke, Grayson McCall, Devin Leary, Jay Kaner. I'm forgetting a lot right now. Nate Cox from Nevada. I think I've got almost everyone within most people's projected top 10 except for Bryce Young and CJ Stroud so far. And it's not even the end of April yet. So I'd say we're doing pretty well so far on that.
As an Eagles fan, I will definitely be taking in your content heading into next year's draft because there's a realistic shot that we'll be looking for a quarterback. So I want to finish up on this. I know this is not going to be a quarterback question, but you're a Mississippi State alumni, so I know you probably know a lot about this guy. Tell me what you think about Charles Cross. So you brought up the air raid offense a lot on today's podcast. And I think that actually might be a knock on him because a lot of scouts or people just in team building studying him might say he's not on an island. Air raid doesn't put their tackles on an island. And if like a Myles Garrett's going at you one-on-one, you don't really want that in the NFL, right, from a guy who was from an air raid offense. But what do you think the ceiling for Charles Cross is, and do you think he should be going ahead of Ekwonu or Evan Neal?
Yeah, I think that he's the best offensive tackle in the draft. The air raid gets a little bit of a bad rap just because of how different we do things in our offensive line. So we have wider splits and then our guys are in a 2-point stance instead of a 3-point stance. But I don't think that just because he wasn't primarily a run blocker that he can't run block in the NFL. And I think he showed a lot of versatility to play in different places and do a lot of different things at pro day. And I think that just because the air raid itself, like I said, is a stigma that people knock every single position from just for one reason or another. But I think that he can do everything that's asked of him at the position. And I think that he presents probably a higher level of versatility than the rest of the guys in this class do. So yeah, it's just the fun. I was talking to his offensive line coach the other day, and he said that run blocking is more of a mentality than anything else. And then the other thing too is that Charles Cross was not recruited into the air raid. He was recruited by Joe Moorhead, who ran more of a power run scheme, utilized a lot of quarterback runs, didn't throw the ball a whole lot. So that's what he was originally supposed to play in. So I think that kind of answers those questions.
Crissy Froyd of the Draft Network and NBC Sports. Crissy, you were awesome today. Thanks so much for taking the time. Before we go, why don't you plug in anything you want the listeners to take a look at?
Yeah, so all the quarterback content's at NBC Sports Edge, the Draft Network, and then everything Mississippi State. We do a lot of that as well over at Sports Illustrated.
Crissy, thanks so much. Enjoy this weekend.